Two German shepherds were abandoned in the middle of a snowstorm. What happened next? No one knows why they were there. Trapped in a blinding blizzard on an empty road with no cars in sight, they were shivering, tangled in barbed wire. And then, a man running from his past suddenly stopped. He didn't stop to be a hero. He stopped because in those panicked eyes, he saw something that once felt familiar. Before we jump into today's story, we'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button for dog stories. It means a lot to us. It's also the best way to let us know you're enjoying this kind of content. Thank you so much. And this is how it all began, when the silence of snow met the fragile breath of two tiny hearts. Wind swept through the mountains of northern Montana like invisible blades, slicing through the air and icing the roads in unpredictable sheets. On Highway 212, a place so remote even maps rarely get it right, an old Ford F-250 pickup cut through the storm, its headlights carving two faint yellow paths in a sea of white. Behind the wheel was a man named Miles Granger, 47 years old, a former K-9 police officer, now just a rugged figure in a faded military jacket. He wasn't driving because he wanted to. He was driving because there was nowhere else to stop. Behind him were years he couldn't get back, a career that once made him proud, a dog named Valor who died on a mission he couldn't save him from, a family he once had, and a silence that settled deep in his bones. Miles wasn't listening to the radio. He didn't crank the heat, just the steady rhythm of the wiper blades, dragging the crunch of ice and snow across the windshield. The storm no longer scared him. It just numbed everything. It happened as he was rounding a quiet bend. A quick flicker of movement, too low, too fast, flashed at the edge of his vision. Instinctively, Miles hit the brakes. The tires screeched across the ice, and the truck slid a few meters before coming to a stop. He opened the door and stepped out into wind that lashed like a whip. Flashlight in hand, he cut through the thick snowfall, scanning the roadside brush. There was a sound, a whimper, barely more than a final breath. Miles crouched down. Tangled in a mess of rusted barbed wire, like a cruel snare, were two tiny creatures huddled tight together. One male, one female. Dark golden fur, soaked and streaked with blood. Flecks of white clung to their muzzles like snow melting on the last thread of hope. This wasn't an accident. The wire was wrapped tight, knotted on purpose. Someone had left them here, in the heart of a brutal winter, to die unnoticed. Miles dropped to his knees. "Easy. I'm not gonna hurt you." His voice was low, rough, maybe from the cold, maybe from years of silence. He pulled a small knife from his pocket and started cutting the wire. Slow, careful. One wrong move, and that soft skin would tear. His hands were soon covered in blood. But the male dog didn't bite. He just stared, amber eyes not afraid, just bone-deep tired. The little girl was worse, barely moving. Her breathing so shallow it was almost invisible. Miles lifted them both, so light it hurt to feel, and headed back to the truck. The door slammed shut, sealing off the world outside. He laid them on the passenger seat, wrapping them in the thick coat he once kept for Valor. The engine rumbled back to life, the rear tires spinning on ice before finally catching traction. Miles had no idea where he was taking them, only that stopping wasn't an option. Outside, the storm kept howling, but inside that old cab, three lives pressed close, two fragile hearts and one that had long gone cold. Beginning a journey no one saw coming. The second chance at life. The male pup's fur was crusted with ice, but as Miles laid him down on the seat and wrapped him in thick fabric, that little head still tried to lift, pure instinct. The girl was smaller, weaker, so fragile that even breathing made her tiny body tremble. She curled up in his arms, still without resistance. He stuffed a towel behind the seat for support and cranked the heat up to max. Warm air slowly began to fill the cab. His old jacket, the one that had gotten him and Valor through long stakeouts, was now wrapped around two lives not even 2 months old. Wind screamed around the truck, but inside there was only the sound of broken breaths and the heartbeat of a man who had no idea what was coming next. Miles pulled a small first aid kit from the back compartment. His hands fumbled, not from the cold, but because the male pup was staring straight at him. Not afraid, not angry. Just waiting. Exactly like Valor used to look at him. Valor, the German shepherd who once saved his life from a machete-wielding killer after a chase that tore through 3 city blocks and a dark market alley. clenched his jaw, carefully snipped the last of the barbed wire from the pup's leg, and gently wiped away the dried blood. The dog whimpered, but didn't growl. And when Miles leaned down to check the back paw, something made him stop, a faint tattoo inside the left ear. A string of numbers. Miles sat up straight. His fingers brushed the mark like someone touching a memory they'd locked away. No way. He'd seen this before. Back in advanced canine training in 2013. Dogs handpicked and marked with ID numbers tied to bloodlines, usually special Malinois Shepherd mixes bred for peak performance in rapid response teams. Miles gently lifted the female's right ear. Nothing there, but the small, half-healed incision under her belly, a thin line barely visible, was a telltale sign of a microchip implant. Someone had prepped these two for training, then dumped them. Miles didn't get it. These were the kind of dogs the black market would pay thousands for at auction. They weren't the type bred to be thrown away. Not unless something went wrong. The little girl stirred, as if sensing the thought crossing his mind. Miles grabbed a clean cloth and dabbed gently at the open wound on her shoulder. The bleeding had stopped, but the deep bruise underneath said a lot. Blunt force trauma. She'd either been hit or thrown. A slow burn lit in his gut. He used to think he didn't have it in him to feel anger anymore. But in that moment, with the headlights glinting off melting snow and two tiny lives curled up like they were trying to disappear from the world, Miles realized he was angry because they reminded him too much of Valor. And more than that, he was angry at himself for losing the one thing that mattered most, just to outrun the feeling of losing it. He ran a hand down the male pup's back. The little body nudged into his palm, ears drooping, eyes closing. Slowly, almost without meaning to, Miles whispered, "Valor did the same thing. First night we met in the cage, he slept on my foot all night." But this time, there was no training room door. No flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Just a 47-year-old man, an old pickup, and two forgotten lives. Miles started the engine, turned the wheels slowly, guiding the truck against the wind. The GPS blinked weakly, signal lost. He didn't care. There used to be a vet clinic a few miles past the old town of Weston Hollow, if his memory was right. The question was, were they still open? He glanced at the seat beside him. Both were asleep. The male let out a soft snore, and the little girl, though still breathing lightly, had stopped shivering. Miles knew he couldn't leave them behind like he had so many other things. This time, even if the sky fell, even if no one ever thanked him or remembered his name, he'd drive toward whatever light he could find. Because maybe, just maybe, they were the ones pulling him out of a storm he didn't know he was still trapped in. The snow thickened by the minute. The storm wasn't violent in the way it screamed. It was cruel in its silence, slowly blanketing everything, as if trying to erase any trace humans had ever passed through. Miles Granger hugged the barely visible lane markings, one hand steady on the wheel, the other constantly checking the two little lives curled up in his thick coat on the passenger seat. His breath fogged up the glass. The heater kept pumping warm air, but the cold still crept in through every crack. The floorboards, the steering wheel, even the hollow spaces in his chest where old memories used to live. About 30 miles, if he remembered right. He'd stopped in Weston Hollow a few times, just for gas or a break, but never ventured into the town. But there was a vet clinic on the edge, Elkhorn Road, with a sign that read 24-hour emergency. He could only hope that sign still meant something. The wheel jerked slightly as the rear tires slid on a patch of ice. Miles corrected course, muttered a curse, then glanced at the pups. The male was still awake, eyes half-lidded, but no longer on guard, like when he'd first been lifted out of the snow. The girl, Wren, he'd started calling her in his head, was still breathing shallow, head tilted to one side, her nose twitching slightly with each soft shiver. Miles gripped the wheel tighter. "Hang on. We're almost there." The entrance to Weston Hollow appeared around a wind-sheltered bend, streetlights flickering like candles about to go out. The clinic showed up just past a row of shuttered lumber shops, a small brick building with a tin roof and a carved wooden sign. Ray Animal Care, emergency vet on call. Miles pulled in at an angle in front of the door, no other cars in the lot. He stepped out, the pups bundled in his coat like a makeshift blanket nest. The wind clawed at his face, but he didn't feel the cold, just the fear that he might be too late. He knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Then a third time. The lock clicked and the door opened. A woman stood in the frame, dark brown hair pulled back, ice blue eyes, an old charcoal hoodie showing under her white lab coat. She still had gloves on, and the faint smell of antiseptic followed her out. "We're not open at this how." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Miles. Then looked down. "What happened?" Her voice was calm, almost cold, but her eyes had already changed. "Left out in the storm. One of them's hurt pretty bad. I think the little girl's in shock." She stepped aside, holding the door open. "Bring them in." Inside, the clinic was tidy, warm, but no frills. A steel exam table in the center, a small incubator tucked in the corner, shelves of meds, and an old radio playing soft jazz. The air carried a mix of antiseptic, dog fur, and something close to lavender. She placed one hand on the male, Bishop, the name Miles had come up with just minutes before walking in, then moved to Wren. No small talk. Just work. Miles stood a step back from the table, watching. He saw the way her hand went straight to the pressure points, how her eyes scanned every cut, tracked their breathing, checked circulation, took temperatures. No questions, no second guessing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her legs swollen from soft tissue trauma. The abdominal wound isn't deep, but she's hypothermic. I need to get her on fluids and warming now. Miles nodded. She didn't ask his name, didn't ask why he was bringing in two half-frozen pups at 2 a.m. in the middle of a snowstorm. She just motioned for him to step back, then got to work. Hooking up fluids, administering antibiotics, placing Wren gently into the incubator. Bishop never took his eyes off her, even while she cleaned and wrapped his own wounds. "Lucky you got here when you did," she said, eyes fixed on the monitor. Miles sank into a chair by the wall, leaned his head against the window. For the first time in years, he felt still. Not healed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza Ray." "Vet." "Almost 15 years now." Miles looked at her more closely. Her face didn't give much away, but her hands, scarred, nails cut short, were the kind that had pulled lives back from the edge more times than they could count. He nodded. "Thanks, Eliza." She didn't respond. But for the first time, Miles felt like maybe, just maybe, he could trust one more person. Besides the two dogs who had just crashed into his life in the most unexpected way. The IV machine ticked like a countdown clock. Inside the misted incubator, Wren curled beneath a thin blanket, her breath still short, her chest rising and falling like she was afraid to be noticed. Eliza Ray didn't look up, her hands moving steadily, checking pulse, adjusting the heat, fine-tuning the drip. She worked in silence, precise, almost clinical, but her eyes were anything but cold. Miles stayed where he was, back against the wall, eyes locked on the little girl. Bishop lay by his feet, head resting on his boot, motionless, watching his sister. Once again, he felt powerless in the face of life, and how easily it could slip away. Years ago, a patrol car raced through the southwest hills of Wyoming before sunrise. Miles was a lieutenant then, younger, faster, and more sure of what was right and wrong than he was now. Riding shotgun was Chris Malone, his best friend and partner, and in the back was Valor, their purebred shepherd, tall, sharp, and fiercely loyal. They were closing in on a suspected arms dealer who'd just crossed state lines. GPS said less than 2 miles to target. Everything was by the book, until there was no book left to follow. The suspect had set an ambush at a bend in the road. A buried mine sent the car flying. When Miles came to, blood was dripping down his forehead, his ears ringing. Chris wasn't moving. Valor was barking, then took off into the brush where the noise had come from. There was one gunshot. Then nothing. When the backup team arrived, Chris was already dead. So was Valor, a single bullet through the left side of his chest. Miles had never forgiven himself. No one blamed him. People said he was lucky to be alive, called him the one who made it out. He didn't call it luck. He called it a shame no excuse could fix. What followed was a slow unraveling. He quit the force, drank more, fell silent inside his own home. Nora, his wife, tried, 2 long years of trying, until the day she could no longer recognize the man sleeping next to her. Ivy was only 8 when he packed a suitcase and left, just to keep from hurting them more. And then, nothing. 4 years of silence. No calls, no letters, no birthday visits. He didn't show up for Ivy's elementary school graduation. No excuse would have been enough. No apology would have arrived on time. He punished himself by drifting through the northern states, hauling freight through winter highways, a job where loneliness passed for a full schedule. He told strangers he used to be a cop, but never said anything beyond that. Valor was the name he no longer spoke, but he dreamed of him every night. That cold nose nudging his hand, the warning bark, the lean body throwing itself into danger without a second's hesitation, just to protect him. And now, looking at Bishop, the way he never left Wren's side, always watching her, even if just with his eyes, Miles knew some part of Valor had never really gone. "Eliza," he said, voice rough. She turned, one hand still steady on the IV bag. "I used to be K9, he said. Lost my partner, lost my dog. After that, I left the job, left my family too." Eliza didn't answer right away, just looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I used to think only vets saw that kind of damage." Miles let out a dry breath, something almost like a laugh. "Dogs don't betray you. They don't question you. They don't ask why you weren't enough." She nodded, turning back to Wren. "She's stabilizing, but tonight will be the turning point." Miles leaned his head against the wall. Outside, the wind slammed against the glass, snow sweeping past like pale ghosts. He closed his eyes. In the dark, an old dream returned. A country road, a dog running ahead, turning back to wait for its owner. This time, Miles followed, not to forget, but to remember. The scanner's light flickered weakly in Eliza's hand as she passed it slowly over Bishop's left shoulder. Miles stood behind her, hands clenched in his coat pockets, eyes locked on every movement. Wren was asleep in the incubator now, her temperature stable, heartbeat even. Eliza was being thorough, checking everything, leaving nothing to chance. "Nothing on the right side," she murmured, lifting Bishop's ear to scan again. "But here." The scanner gave a single soft beep. A string of numbers flashed onto the small screen. Eliza frowned, fingers moving across the navigation buttons before connecting the scanner to a laptop in the corner of the table. The town's internet was spotty, flickering like a late winter breath, but the National Chip Registry site finally loaded. Slowly, but it loaded. Miles stayed silent. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, only that his heart was pounding, and Bishop, still standing there quietly, looked like he knew something important was about to unfold too. Eliza typed the chip ID again. The screen blinked once, then the information appeared. ID K9 VLR 139B3. Breed Belgian Malinois German Shepherd Hybrid Program. WIK9 Valor Breeding Trial terminated. DOB September 6 to 3 months ago. Sire, K9 Valor. Original ownership, Wyoming State Police Rapid Response Unit. Final note, training discontinued. Failed to meet standards, removed from program, not reassigned. Eliza turned to him. "You need to see this." Miles stepped forward. He read each line, his eyes locking on one word that stopped everything. Valor. The room fell silent, not quiet, frozen, the kind of stillness that hits just before everything changes. Only the steady sound of Wren's breathing in the incubator and the soft clack of Eliza's keys as she saved the scan broke through. He looked at Bishop. The pup was lying down now, head resting on his front paws, eyes open, calm, unnervingly calm. "Valor's his father," Eliza said. "No questions, no doubt." Miles nodded slowly. "The breeding program must have started after Valor, after he died," he said, the words scraping their way out. "Maybe they took samples before it happened. I had no idea." Eliza said nothing. She didn't need to. Some truths didn't require explanation. "You don't work there anymore," she said softly. Miles nodded. "I walked away right after it happened. Didn't follow the news. Cut all ties." Eliza glanced at the screen again. According to the data, Bishop was one of the first from that breeding trial, but he was pulled from the program, failed to meet the psychological thresholds, reason not listed. And instead of giving him a proper home, Miles said through clenched teeth, someone dumped him to die in the snow. He stepped back, jaw tight, eyes darkening like something inside was being strangled. Eliza didn't respond, but her expression said enough. This wasn't new to her. In her world, cruelty like that didn't always wear a face. It just disappeared into the system. Miles sank into the chair again, resting a hand on Bishop's head. The pup closed his eyes, tilting slightly, just like Valor used to when scratched behind the ear. "Maybe I couldn't save his father," he whispered. "But this time, I'm not walking away." Eliza looked at him. For the first time, her eyes weren't just clinical, they were personal. "You're not the only one who owes him a chance," she said. Miles let out a long, heavy breath, like something had finally been pushed out of his chest after years of being stuck there. Bishop lifted his head, leaned forward, and licked his palm. Calm, steady, without fear. He didn't need words to understand. It knew. Even if it never saw its father's face, never heard his name, something in its blood still recognized the man who once meant everything to Valor. Maybe in this world, there was still such a thing as inherited loyalty, passed down through generations, without ever being taught. Miles gently squeezed Bishop's shoulder. In his mind, a door had opened, not one that led backward, one that pointed forward. The sky over Weston Hollow was still slate gray when Miles stepped out of the clinic the next morning. The snow had stopped sometime after midnight, leaving a thick white coat on everything: rooftops, power lines, windowsills. The town remained in its hush, save for the distant scrape of a snow shovel, steady as the breath of a place long used to being alone. Miles stood at the truck, hand resting on the door handle, but not pulling it open. He turned to look back at the small brown brick building behind him. Ray Animal Care. The place where, just hours ago, a past he thought he'd buried had been unearthed by a chip ID and a pair of hauntingly familiar eyes. He'd planned to leave the moment he found out Bishop was Valor's son. But he couldn't. Not this time. Miles rented a small room above an old auto shop, just 4 blocks from the clinic. It was bare, single bed, aging heater, a wooden desk with a cigarette burn on the corner. But to Miles, it was enough. He didn't need much. Just time and a chance. 3 days passed. In the mornings, he helped Eliza clean kennels, prep meds, and learned how to mix Wren's special meals. Around midday, he took Bishop out back behind the clinic, a snow-covered patch of yard enclosed by a wooden fence, for basic training. Not with commands, but with eye contact, hand signals, and the steady rhythm of repetition. Bishop picked things up fast. He responded better to signals from the left hand, hated the sound of metal clanging, and always stepped in front of others when he heard something off. A clear, protective instinct, but never aggressive. Every time Miles crouched down, placed his palm gently on Bishop's neck, and looked into his eyes, he saw himself again. Not the broken man left behind after the explosion, but the officer who still believed in survival, in that unspoken bond between human and dog. And Wren, she was a lesson in resilience. Every step still carried a limp, but each day she walked a little farther than the last. Every time she stumbled, she'd push herself back up, bracing on the edge of a cushion or leaning against Bishop's side. She didn't run, didn't bark, didn't react as quickly as her brother, but she watched, deeply, like she was learning how to trust again, one quiet moment at a time. And the moment that choked Miles up the most wasn't when Wren managed to walk 5 straight meters. It was the first time she walked to him on her own, unprompted, and rested her head on his knee. No coaxing, no command. She just chose him. In that moment, Miles knew. He couldn't leave. Not because of a debt to Valor, not because of guilt, but because the 2 lives in front of him, one strong, one fragile, had given him something he hadn't felt in years, a reason to stay. The pale morning sun spilled across the clinic's back lot, turning the snow into a soft gold glaze over a cold white canvas. Miles stood in the middle of it, hands resting in the pockets of his thick jacket, eyes locked on Bishop, who was laser-focused. A few feet away, Wren carefully stepped through a line of small training cones he'd just set up, slow but without hesitation. "Good girl," he said quietly. Not loud, just enough for her to lift her head, ears twitching at the sound. Bishop was working on a downstay drill, responding to a hand signal, then holding the position for 5 seconds. He'd nailed it 3 times in a row. Miles didn't know he was being filmed. On the other side of the wooden fence, a red-haired girl, maybe 19, stood next to an ice-crusted Jeep, phone in hand. She smiled as she quietly recorded the scene. A weathered man, marked by life, patiently training 2 dogs in the snow with the gentleness of someone who had nothing left to prove, only something to give. When Wren finished the walk and sat herself down beside Bishop, Miles bent over and placed a hand on each of their heads. The sunlight hit the frame just right, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. That afternoon, the video went live on TikTok and YouTube, titled, "They Call Them the Winter Pair, From Snow to Second Chances." No effects, no dramatic soundtrack, just the sound of wind, Miles saying good job and 2 golden pups in a snow-covered yard. Within 24 hours, it had over 80,000 views. By day 3, 1.2 million. The comments poured in. This is the healing video I didn't know I needed. I cried when she put her head on his leg. Someone give this man a hug, and those 2 dogs too. The internet gave them a name. The Winter Pair. Fan art started popping up. People asked if it was part of a documentary. Dog lovers everywhere shared it like wildfire. A new Instagram account was created just to post updates, photos, and clips of Bishop and Wren. Miles didn't know any of this. Not until Eliza walked into the clinic, holding a cup of coffee and her phone. "You're famous now," she said, handing it over. Miles frowned. "What did I do?" Eliza pointed at the screen. "Just lived honestly with 2 dogs." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "They deserve to be seen." Eliza nodded. "And you deserve to be remembered." Miles didn't smile, but when he stepped back out into the yard, Bishop running ahead, Wren following close behind, her gait still uneven but no longer shaky, he felt something shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just right on time. The message came on a still afternoon, while Miles was scraping snow from the clinic steps. Eliza stood behind the front counter, phone in hand, her eyes lingering on the screen a little longer than usual. "You've got mail," she said, not looking up. Miles straightened, gloves crusted with ice. "What?" She held up the phone. "Clinic's account? Someone sent a message, asked us to pass it on. They mentioned you by name." Miles stepped inside, brushing snow off his shoulders, heart skipping slightly. Eliza handed him the screen. From n.holloway83@email.com. Subject, "Just saw you." The message was short. "Ivy and I just saw the video." She was quiet for 3 minutes after, then asked, "That's Dad, isn't it?" I didn't answer right away, but I think I needed to send this. If you see this at the right time, and if you still want to, write back. We're in Lincoln. Same address. I don't know what will come of it, but Ivy deserves to know. Miles couldn't breathe for a few seconds. Her name, Nora, hit like a knock on a door he thought he'd bolted shut. And Ivy, the little girl who used to call him a superhero every time he wore his uniform. She was 13 now. Maybe she didn't remember his voice. Maybe she'd grown used to his absence at every birthday, recital, and milestone. He set the phone down on the counter, his arms tightening instinctively. Eliza didn't move. "You don't have to answer right now." "I don't know if I should answer at all." "Because you're scared?" she asked. He said nothing. Eliza pulled off her gloves, set them gently on the table, her voice softening. "Who do you think you are to them?" Miles gave a half laugh, bitter and worn. "A bad memory, a ghost. The guy who left with no explanation." "What if you're wrong?" she said. "What if they've just been waiting for you to be brave enough to come back?" Miles looked out through the glass door. Bishop was lying on the top step, chin resting on his paws, eyes following the falling snow. Wren sat beside him, head tilted, watching Miles through the glass, not pushing, not judging, just waiting. "You don't owe me an explanation," Eliza said gently. "But if you walk away from this again without facing it, there might not be anything left to come back to next time." Miles swallowed hard. That old feeling rose in his chest like fog, thick and familiar. The memory of walking out of that house, Nora's eyes blazing, and the muffled sound of his daughter crying behind her bedroom door. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the email app. He typed slowly. "No flourishes. If she still wants to see me, I'll come. And if you still want to hear me say I'm sorry, I will. Not to make up for the past, but because I finally understand, some people aren't meant to disappear forever." He hit send. Eliza didn't say anything else, just handed him a cup of hot coffee. As he turned to leave, she said softly, "It's a long drive to Lincoln. Make sure you bring your 2 special passengers." Miles looked toward the door. Bishop was already on his feet. Wren still sat like she'd known all along. This day would come. The city sign for Bluebridge appeared through a curtain of light drizzle. A dull gray steel plate with simple black letters, "Welcome to Bluebridge. Heartland proud." Miles watched it through a fogged windshield, his fingers tightening slightly around the wheel. In the back seat, 2 golden heads rose. Bishop sat tall, ears alert, like he was guarding the road ahead. Wren leaned against the seat back, blinking slowly, curious, calm, like the storm inside her had finally passed. Nora's apartment was just a few blocks from the high school. Miles wasn't planning to knock. not yet. He'd told Nora not to say anything to Ivy until he arrived. He just wanted to see her first, just to be sure she was okay. Miles parked across the street from the school gates. The digital clock on the dash blinked 2:47 p.m. The school bell rang. A flood of students spilled out, backpacks swinging, earbuds half in, jackets flapping in the cool early spring wind. Miles felt his heart pick up speed. Wren leaned toward the window, tail giving a soft wag, sensing something. Bishop stayed still, eyes scanning every face like he was running silent intel. And then he saw her, Ivy. Taller than he remembered. Long dark hair tied back messily. Gray hoodie. One earbud in. She wasn't looking around, just walking with her head down, thumbing through her phone, alone. Miles reached for the door and pushed it open. Stay, he said quietly to the dogs. But Wren, like she'd waited her whole short life for this exact moment, ignored the first and only command he hadn't meant to give. She leapt over the front seat and darted through the cracked door. Wren, it all happened in seconds. A white SUV pulled out from the parking lot. The driver didn't see the small golden blur darting across the street. Screeching brakes, tires skidding, loud and sharp like metal scraping inside the ear. Wren was clipped, just enough to send her tumbling sideways. Not airborne, not crushed, but the fall was hard enough to freeze the entire schoolyard. Ivy turned around and saw her. Miles was already running. He dropped to his knees beside Wren. She whimpered softly, back leg extended, mouth open as she gasped for breath. No blood, but pain, clear and sharp, etched across her trembling body. Move, Miles shouted. Clear a path. A few students backed away. Some pulled out their phones to record. The white SUV had stopped. The driver, a woman in her 40s, face pale with panic, jumped out, rushing over. I didn't see her. I swear I didn't. It's fine, Miles snapped, eyes still on Wren. Just a puppy. I've got it. Dad. The voice stopped him cold. Ivy stood less than 15 feet away. Her backpack lay at her feet. Eyes wide, lips trembling. Not from the accident, but from the man kneeling in the street, cradling the small golden dog. Her father, the one who disappeared when she was 9. The one she thought only existed now in a handful of old photos her mom kept tucked in a drawer. Police arrived 2 minutes later. A male and a female officer stepped out of the patrol car, both in dark blue uniforms. Report said there was an animal hit, the female officer said, scanning from Wren to Miles. Sir, we'll need to see some ID. Miles exhaled hard, still kneeling beside Wren, who was now trying to lift her head to lick his hand. She's mine, he said. Ran into the street, no one's hurt. Are you a resident here? The male officer asked. No, I'm from Montana. Miles pulled out his wallet and handed over his license. His hand shook, not from the cold. The female officer glanced at the ID, then at Ivy, then exchanged a look with her partner. We'll need to verify, she said. Where's your mother? She asked Ivy gently. Ivy swallowed. She's at work. I don't know what's going on. Miles opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was, Miles had no legal right to be here with his daughter. No custody papers, no visitation order, just an email. And a heart that hadn't stopped aching since the day he left. Then another voice cut through the tension. He's her father. Everyone turned. Nora stood at the edge of the lot, one hand gripping the steering wheel of her old Toyota, eyes locked forward. And she has the right to see him. The female officer gave a slight nod, jotting down a few notes, then stepped back. I don't know what the paperwork says, Nora continued, voice steady, but he's not a stranger. Miles looked at Ivy. She didn't run to him. She didn't turn away either. She just stood there, looking straight at him. Then slowly, Ivy stepped closer. Is she okay? She asked softly. Miles nodded, his voice catching. Just a sprain. The vet will take another look. I'm so sorry this happened. Ivy didn't respond right away, but she knelt down and gently ran her fingers over Wren's head. A moment passed. Then she whispered, What's her name? Miles blinked. Wren, because she doesn't give up. Ivy gave a small nod. And for the first time in 5 years, their eyes met. Not with blame, not with tears, but in a quiet, steady beat long enough to begin something again. That evening, Miles sat in silence in the waiting room of the local precinct, the air carrying the faint smell of old vinyl and stale coffee. The late sun filtered through a frosted window, casting a warm stripe across his dark jacket. He'd expected to be held longer, but then a familiar voice came from the doorway. He's real, Nora said, walking in beside a tall man in plain clothes, the district lieutenant and an old classmate of hers. Not a stranger, not a threat, just her dad. After a few calls, a couple of cautious nods and a signed temporary agreement, Miles was allowed to see his daughter again, at a public park near the school, with supervision, but no more walls made of doubt. West Hill Park looked barren this time of year, the grass still speckled with frost, but the stone benches were warm under the late winter sun, and the quiet was just enough to make real conversation possible. Ivy sat across from Miles, her hands tightly woven in her lap. Wren lay between them, her head resting on Ivy's knee, eyes closed, breathing steady. Miles didn't know if Wren understood what was happening, but she stayed still, as if she knew her presence was holding the weight for both sides. "Her name's Wren?" Ivy asked softly. Miles nodded. "I named her that because she's tiny, but she fought to survive. Like the bird. Wrens are stubborn little things." Ivy let out a quiet laugh. "Like you." Miles looked at his daughter. Her hair was tousled by the wind, her eyes a little swollen from a long day, but there was something in them he hadn't seen before. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a door left open. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low, "for leaving, for going silent, for not being there when you needed me." Ivy didn't answer right away. She stroked Wren's back gently, her hands trembling even though the cold had mostly lifted. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "Mom never talked bad about you, but I still thought, maybe you just didn't want me anymore." Miles bowed his head, heart tightening. "It was never that." "I know," Ivy said, softer now. "That video, the way you looked at those dogs, I didn't see someone who left. I saw someone who'd been left behind. And who's trying to fix it?" Miles couldn't hold the tears back. He didn't sob. It was quiet, like everything inside him had been still for too long and finally cracked open. Ivy reached out and placed her hand over his. Wren shifted slightly, then licked Ivy's palm, like she was sealing something gently for the both of them. "Can I see you again?" Ivy asked. Miles's voice caught. "If you want me to, I'll stay as long as you'll have me." Ivy wrapped her arms around Wren, then leaned sideways, resting her head lightly on her father's shoulder. Beneath the bare trees, three souls once shaped by fracture now began stitching themselves together. Quietly, imperfectly, but enough to hold. For the first time in 5 years, Miles didn't feel like a man who had survived. He felt like a father, finally finding his way back. The following spring, Weston Hollow no longer looked like the whitewashed memory Miles first knew. The snow had melted. What was once mud along the roadside had given way to green grass peppered with wildflowers. But the biggest change wasn't the town. It was the stretch of land behind Ray Animal Care, the once quiet backyard, now transformed into a small center with a wooden sign at the gate. The Haven. A place for the ones left behind, and for those who no longer wanted to keep leaving. Miles stood beneath the newly built awning, steam rising from the coffee in his hand, eyes on the neat fence enclosing the lot, where 3 dogs raced across the training yard. One of them was Wren, fully recovered now, though her gait still held that signature tilt, like she was always moving half a beat off from the world around her. And somehow, that made her even more beloved, at school, at community meetups, and especially by the shyest kids. Beside Wren, Bishop remained as strong as ever. He had been trained carefully under Miles's guidance, not to become a canine like his father, but to become a living symbol of life's second chances. Not everyone is born to serve, but everyone deserves love and a purpose. The townspeople began visiting the center from day one. They brought in injured dogs, abandoned dogs, dogs once raised to fight. Eliza, with her steady hands and years of quiet expertise, handled medical care and recovery. Miles took charge of behavior and training. At first, it was just the 2 of them. Then 3 volunteers joined. Soon after, a few retired officers from the neighboring town offered to help. The name, The Haven, was Ivy's idea. A place to land. A place where no one asked, "Why are you like this?" Only, "Where do you want to begin?" That afternoon, Eliza stepped into the backyard, clipboard in hand. Her hair was tied high, old boots caked with wet dirt. She handed Miles a new intake list. "We've got 3 more coming from the state rescue," she said. "One's malnourished, the other 2 are afraid of people. Think you're up for it?" Miles smiled, finishing the last of his coffee. "If I wasn't, I wouldn't have named this place The Haven." Eliza gave a soft laugh and turned to head back inside. But just before she reached the door, she looked over her shoulder. "Oh, someone's coming by tonight to interview you. Vet magazine. They want to write about Wren and Bishop." "Again?" Miles raised an eyebrow. Eliza shrugged. The winter pair. Still not cooling off anytime soon. Miles looked out at the yard. Wren was lying with her head resting on Bishop's back, like the whole world was just one big pillow only the two of them knew how to use. From two creatures once tangled in barbed wire in the middle of a snowstorm, they had become the very heart of what the Haven stood for. Persistence. And the right to live as who you are. That night, Miles sat by the fireplace, handwriting a simple code of conduct for the center. Bishop was fast asleep beside the hearth, and Wren had her head on Ivy's legs, now a regular at the center, unofficially promoted to assistant. She carried a camera and a tablet everywhere, documenting the recovery of every dog that passed through. Miles glanced at her. She was busy retying ropes on the new agility course out back. "We've got more newcomers tomorrow," he said. Ivy didn't look up. "More chances," she replied. Miles smiled. "Exactly." The photo hanging on the wall behind Miles was taken on opening day. Miles, Eliza, Ivy, Bishop, and Wren, standing in front of the wooden gate carved with one simple line, "The Haven, where the broken come to begin." It wasn't a place for perfection. It was a place for starting over. The story of Wren, Bishop, and Miles wasn't just about rescuing a couple of dogs. It was about redemption between people. Proof that loyalty doesn't die, and that love, when given at the right moment, can restart an entire life. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe to follow Dog Stories, where tales of loyalty, healing, and unconditional love continue to be told. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Has a dog ever changed your life? We'd love to hear your story, because sometimes what we need most is someone, or some dog, who won't leave us, even in the middle of the worst snowstorm.